So I'm Jack Pauler, and I am going here to talk to you about Zero Trust and how Zero Trust is a strategy, not a product. So bingo, whoops, let's try that again, there we go. So to just have this discussion, what we're going to do is rewind back to 2019. And that's what now, 4 or 5 years ago. And in 2019, we had a few remote workers, and we had VPNs for the remote workers. And the way VPN worked is a remote worker's machine would dial in or connect to the VPN, would do its authorization, and it would then essentially create a virtual network where the remote worker had direct access to the internal network inside the firewall and to all the servers. And that meant that anybody who was remote could then talk to any server and any network that were connected to that. And that sort of created a big security hole. But it wasn't really a problem because we only had a few remote workers. Then this thing hit. Everybody remember coronavirus? And we all turned into this, right? We all started working from home in our jammies with our shirt and tie on underneath the desk. And what that meant is all of a sudden we needed to support VPN for the many. And the big problem here is that little straw to the server is very tiny. So you had a lot of people coming in, and VPN concentrators are very expensive, and they were licensed on a per user basis. And so companies looked at it and said, all of a sudden we went from needing 100 licenses to 5,000 licenses, and we can't get it, and the boxes don't work. They don't have enough power, and yada, yada, yada. At the same time, a couple of companies came out with a product called Zero Trust Network Access. So Zero Trust Network Access works a little bit differently. Instead of the client connecting through a firewall directly to the server has no inbound connections. It only goes outbound, and the server goes outbound to a cloud solution, as does the client, as does an authorization, an IAM solution. So now what you have is the client can connect to the cloud, get authenticated and authorized, and then get access to the servers because the server makes an outbound connection to the cloud, and there's never any inbound connection into your server. So that limits your attack surface. It limits the ability for attackers to directly talk to the servers and exploit vulnerabilities and that type of thing. The other good thing about this is as you add more clients, each client has their own bandwidth to the cloud, and if they need more bandwidth, they need more throughput, they can get a bigger pipe. And if you need more throughput from the cloud to your servers, you can just get more pipes, and it's very quick and easy, and it's very cost effective. So everybody thought that ZTNA was Zero Trust because it had Zero Trust in the name. But ZTNA is just a product. It is not Zero Trust. To understand what Zero Trust is, we need to rewind a little bit further and go back to 2010, when a lot of network security people were thinking about these problems that we had with VPNs and some of the other things, and a lot of attackers getting in. And one of the big problems we had were attackers doing what we call lateral access. Once they got in through VPN or some other means into your network, they would then move from one server to another till they got to all the core sensitive data that you wanted, and they were extracting that and exfiltrating that. So our security architecture at the time was what we call castle and moat architecture. It was based on the concept that you have a moat surrounding all of your servers and all of your goodies that you want to protect. And to cross the moat, you go through a firewall. Once you get into the environment, once you get into the castle or your server environment through the firewall, everything that you do is every server is fair game, and you are completely trusted. And so that was really the trust but verify solution. So anything, once you were verified, you got in, you could go talk to any server you wanted, see any application, get to any disk drives, any storage, and that was pretty insecure. So an analyst at Forrester, John Kindervag, sort of came up with the concept of zero trust, which was never trust anything and always verify everything. So that he came up with that concept in 2010 and started talking about it and started popularizing it and promoting it, but it didn't catch on until about 2014 when Google came out with their concept of how do we implement this, and they called that BeyondCorp, beyond a corporation. And Google now does this, and there is no such thing as a private network inside of Google. You have to be authenticated and authorized, and you can use any device from anywhere at any time as a Google person and get to where you need to go. So the principles of zero trust that make this work is the very first principle is you have to explicitly verify everything that you do before you allow communication to happen. So when a user wants to connect to a service, that user has to be authenticated and authorized explicitly, but most importantly, authenticated. Are you who you say you are? That also applies to machines and machine identities. Is the machine is the server that the user is talking to, is it who it says it's supposed to be? The same thing for API connection points. Anything talking to anything has to be authenticated first. And we want to do as strict of an authentication as we can. So instead of just username and password, we also want to verify things like, is the machine that the user is using healthy? Is it up to date? Does it have the correct security protocols installed? Is it protected? Or is it like with Android phones, we used to call them jailbroken if somebody had gotten through and corrupted the OS. So we want to check the device status. We also want to check things like your location, time of day. If you normally come in the East Coast 8 to 5, and now you're trying to access it the network at midnight from Russia, we probably don't want to let you in and authenticate you. We want to do some more authentication. So all of that is very important to make sure that this is how we trust. Do we establish the trust? The second thing we want to do is use the principle of least privilege access. Boiled down, this basically means we give a user access to only the resources they need to do their job and not anything more. So one of the problems we have today is when we build in identity and access management solutions, when we have a new person come in and we hire them, we give them access to a whole lot of stuff because no security admin or no system admin wants to get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the CEO who says, we lost this big deal, or we lost this big customer, we lost millions of dollars because this person couldn't get to where they needed to go. So we end up over-permissioning people, and we give them access to stuff they shouldn't have access to. Now, in the normal day-to-day world, that's not a problem until an attacker assumes their identity, and then that attacker gets access to stuff that they shouldn't have access to. So we want to limit your access, your authorization, to only the things that you should have access to in order to do your day-to-day job. So for instance, if you're one of the tech field day delegates and you're a marketing person or a salesperson, you should not have access to the company's accounting or payroll systems, right? Although in many cases you do, because it's easier for people to do that. The third principle is always assume that you've been breached. If you've been breached, what are you going to do? So you want to protect your environment. You want to limit the blast radius of an attack, meaning you want to limit the reach of an attacker to get from where they ended up compromising a system to where they can go. So if an attacker somehow, if you're using your laptop in a Starbucks and your laptop automatically connects to the guest network, and that's some guy sitting in his car outside with a little Wi-Fi access point, and now he's got access to all of your data and he got your access to your laptop, you don't want that guy to be able to get access to the company's payroll system or its intellectual property, its source code control database, stuff like that. So we want to make sure that if that happens, we limit what they can get to, and we want to protect our data as strongly as possible. So we want end-to-end encryption, and then we want to have a lot of analytics to detect these breaches that are always happening. We just don't know about them, so we want to make sure we can find as many as possible. So zero trust is really a cybersecurity strategy. It requires a complex set of integrated and interoperating controls in order for it to work. It is not a single product. You can't go out and buy a zero trust product. You have to implement this strategy by implementing strong identity controls, with strong authentication and authorization. You need to have security on all of your devices to make sure that they're not compromised in some other way. You need to have strong network security. You have to have strong application and workload security, and you have to have strong data security. And all of this requires an underlayment of visibility and analytics. One of the prime concepts in security is you can't protect what you don't know about. So you really have to understand your entire environment and every asset, every piece of data, every storage location, every application, every workload, every API endpoint, because any one of those that you don't know about is an area of potential compromise. And then you have to have automation and orchestration because there's just so much going on in our modern network environments, and it's very complex. And if you don't automate it, you just have too many people, too many security alerts. You can't process everything in time. It's just too big for humans to manage at these days. And then lastly, you need governance. You basically have to have a set of policies that describe exactly what is allowed and what is not allowed in your particular environment. And understanding that every business is completely different. So what may work for a 350-person law firm is not going to work for a 10,000-person retail organization with 500 stores, right? Every environment is different, and you have to decide what's acceptable and what's not. In a law firm, it may be acceptable for your what we would traditionally call your paralegals or your admins or your secretaries to have access to confidential and corporate documents. In another business, it may not be acceptable for your receptionist to have access to those same confidential documents. So I just want to sort of leave everybody with the concept that zero trust is a strategy. You really have to think about your security in your environment and what you have, what needs to be protected, and how you're going to protect it, and to implement the principles of least privilege access, strong authentication, and never trust anything, always verify. So I'm Jack Poller. I'm a founder and principal analyst at Paradigm Technica, and you can find me typically on LinkedIn or Twitter.